Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Well, welcome everybody to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. And folks that live on the Kenai Peninsula, check your inboxes. HEA has delivered to you their voting online, which I think is a new procedure for them. And I got mine. It didn't show up to my junk mail. It went right to my inbox. Then we had Brad, the general manager of HEA, on a couple days ago to talk about some of the things that they're doing. And so I just want to remind folks that if you live on the Kenai Peninsula and you receive electricity through HEA, check your inbox, because you can vote on a board member. And there's a couple amendments to the bylaws that they're doing, some pretty low-key kind of housekeeping things. And then there's a question at the bottom there that asks you if you are okay with voting online from here on out, or do you still want paper ballots? I believe you can still get a paper ballot, but make sure to check your inbox. It's very important. And it's a sunny day in Alaska, at least here on the Kenai Peninsula, and I will take it. I want that sun to melt the 2 feet of snow sticking around my house, which is super annoying. We have a very special guest today on, he comes back, I think this is your third time, Scott Kendall, who's been the former chief of staff for Governor Walker. He was one of the main legal counsels for Lisa Murkowski back in the day. He spearheaded ranked choice voting and a Bristol Bay ballot initiative, and he's had quite success here being the king of the middle. Scott Kendall, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show.
Oh, thanks, John. Appreciate it. Appreciate the intro. I don't know if I'm the king of anything, but I'll take it.
Well, I oftentimes joke about, my Republican friends and I will get together and, man, why can't we just pull off some victories? And we always joke around, well, we don't have a Scott Kendall out there. It's like you're like the Energizer Bunny, and you probably do all this in your spare time. So kudos to you. I think it's important to be involved, and you're super involved, whether we're on the same side of an issue or not. It's still important to be very involved, and you are. So I wanted to start out by just asking you to tell us a story. When you were chief of staff for Governor Walker, give us a story. Tell us a kind of behind the scenes story that maybe we didn't hear in the press or the reading online or on Facebook. Give us a story of your time with Governor Walker when you were chief of staff.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a story, but like a series of anecdotes. Because we had a joke, he had his critics, as any politician does, as the current governor does. But the thing about him, we sort of had a joke internally about how hard he works, how much he works. And it was literally no joke. I loved working with Bill, but he worked so many hours a day that your worst nightmare was to end up traveling with him, because then you were with him and you'd be up till 11:30 midnight, talking about, like we have a trip to DC. We're meeting with Trump administration folks. We've got a full agenda. Well, let's plan the next day. We're up till midnight planning the next day. And then he's like, okay, well, let's meet for breakfast at 5 a.m. Let's go. We gotta plan out the day again. So many times I'd be putting my kids to bed and I'd be replying to emails, trying to reply to every email every day. It's midnight. I'd reply to some email from him. He'd reply back immediately. It's 12:30 at night. And then, get up in the morning and you've got emails from him at 5 a.m. I don't think I ever, and I grew up on a farm. I'm hard, I work 12 hours a day. I never got to the office before him. And I don't think he ever, I don't think I ever left it after him. At best I could hang until he went. So, whatever you think of these folks, and I think this rings true for a lot of people, regardless of politics. At the end of the day, I think I did the math one day and I pointed out to him that he might be working for minimum wage. If you're going to put in 100 hours a week.
Hours.
Yeah, exactly. So, it goes back to your comments at the start. It's important to be involved. It's important to find spaces in your life to be involved in civic life. And boy, if there is I'm not sure if I aspire to be him, or I'm just sort of in awe of that.
Yeah,
a man who is,
the only Walker story that I have is when I was chief of staff for the borough, we had a problem. It was, like every borough has, a million problems. And sometimes it's tough to navigate the government waters, especially when I was new. I had no idea how anything worked, really. I was just, new on the job, basically. And Governor Walker at the time was speaking at some chamber conference, and I had just a heck of a time trying to solve an issue that we had with the state, the borough, and I came up to the governor and shared with him the issue, and he slipped me a little handwritten piece of paper that had his kind of direct to him email address on it. He said, just email me and we'll take care of it. And I was like, okay, whatever. He's probably just saying that. So it was late at night, I don't know, 10:30 at night. And I thought, well, I'll just email him. I'm going to email him now because I don't want to forget tomorrow. Tomorrow's nuts. And you know how it is, your day gets packed very quickly. And I shot off an email like 10:30, and literally like 10:35, he responds to me.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I mean, I don't know how many times, another great example is, we go to Golconda, for a meeting out there with tribal leaders. There's the whole issue with the access to the longstanding trail. And so we're going there for, what's going to be a tense and important meeting. And they're holding it at the local gym. And we get there and, people are still setting up. So I turn around, I turn back, and there goes Governor Walker with a broom or a mop. He's sweeping up,
He's literally sweeping up the floors.
Yeah, he's sweeping the floor. So boy, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to start moving tables around in chairs because I can't let the boss show me up. So that exactly what you're talking about. It's the same thing. Nothing too big, nothing too little. No one agrees with it. He was my boss. I didn't agree with every decision he made, but the sort of attention and empathy that he gave every decision, didn't matter who you were. If you asked for a meeting, you got the meeting. I think that was a pretty cool aspect of the way he did things.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. So let's talk a little bit about this year's House, Senate, or Alaska House and Alaska Senate. There is talks of sales tax. There's talks of a small income tax. There's proposals from both sides of the aisle, Republican, Democrat, even the governor. What are your thoughts on these kind of tax talks, and is there one that you like, or do you prefer none of them?
That first of all, to everyone who's talking, having been out there and gotten some rocks thrown at us, hats off to them for having the discussion. Because at some point, acknowledging the math and saying, dollars in have to equal dollars out, that's a big step, because that's something legislators and others have kind of been unwilling to do. We sort of got that view early in the governor's first term, where he said, well, this is what we got to cut to get to these full dividends if we want the budget to balance. And of course, the reaction to that was the reaction to that. But now it seems like some kind of honest conversation is happening. And I would just say hats off to them for that. I'm, a lot of people are like, it's got to be a progressive income tax, or it's got to be a sales tax only, or sales taxes belong to local communities. Hey, it's got to be something, right? We got to start diversifying the revenue stream, so we're not constantly dependent on one commodity. We're dependent, with the permanent fund now, we've diversified a bit. We've taken that first step, but to, balance our budget essentially from one year to the next on a commodity that's very volatile, that's not the industry's fault. That's not our fault, but oil goes up, oil goes down. We saw that last year. We saw, basically they had a license to print money for a minute. We had very, very large dividends, and now we got a $500 million deficit.
We also had and then they did a lot of big capital projects that they've been holding off on for a long time.
Yeah, and we all tell ourselves, I didn't get to be chief of staff when we had that kind of money. It would have been kind of a fun thought exercise, but everyone does kind of lose their minds a little when that money just starts flowing.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. It's, I remember, I don't know, it was just last year, I guess this happened, the most conservative folks in the room were asking for the biggest capital projects in the room.
Right. Yeah. And I was a longtime Republican, and I was kind of that classic fiscal conservative Republican. Like, hey, whatever you do, your math's got to work, and it's understandable. But I will say this about where they're at: whether some sort of income-based tax, whether a sales tax, I want them to be smart with it. I think they're due. For obvious reasons, I think there need to be certain exemptions. No one wants to see people get struggling with high food prices getting hammered harder. No one wants to see the cost of living be super high and tax things like rent or childcare. I think we got to be smart. What I'd like to see, with an income tax, the attraction, of course, is there's out-of-state workers, and we're clawing back some of that, those taxes they might even be paying to their home state. With the sales tax, I'd like to see exemptions, sure. I'd like to see some seasonality. There's nothing more Alaskan than saying, let's stick it to the other guy. So I'd love to see something that's like a 2%, from October through May, and then in the summer months, make it 4%. We can all spend our PFDs, when the tax comes back down, but put it out there so that, we get millions of visitors. Let's see them pay for some of the sidewalks and roads they're using. So
yeah, we have some incorporated towns or cities, whatever the correct terminology is, in the Kenai Borough, where they have like a 3% sales tax in the summer and basically nothing in the winter. Or they tax, one of them in the borough used to tax food. I don't believe we tax food anymore. But there's a laundry list of different avenues you could go down. I think what I hear from folks from the extreme fiscal conservative side, which I would say I put myself in that bucket, is have we really cut all that we can? Because how I look at it is that there's always going to be stuff we can be more efficient at, and have we really looked under every single nook and cranny? I don't believe we have, but I also know that it's almost impossible to do, because we saw the governor try to do that early on in his first term, and it's pushed back central. I mean, you might as well think people are in their basements killing kittens or something. I mean, people just went nuts. And so I don't know where that happy medium is, but I do know that folks in Juneau, Republicans and Democrats, are potentially trying to find that. I worry about this getting politicized, and people are going to lose elections potentially because of this, but I guess they're willing to do that for what they see as long-term plans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of scale and scope too. Like, you can find those efficiencies, but compared to the elephant in the room, the sheer size of the expenditure for the dividend, it's such a rounding error that I think you start to lose the will. I do think, a complete package could be something with a more meaningful spending cap, revenue, put all those pieces together. And that's what some of the discussions are. And then earn your way up to a larger dividend. Maybe that's the answer, but it's tough, because I could point at a dozen things that I think we could cut, reduce. At the same time, is it difficult and heartbreaking to know, that every abused woman doesn't have a shelter to go to, that, victims of domestic violence don't necessarily have immediate legal help? Those are, I don't know anyone, Republican, Democrat alike, who thinks those aren't worthy things to do. Yeah. So there are things, we can work on.
And relative to the budget, that's minuscule amounts of money.
Right. And so it's, it's sort of moving those big rocks. So I wish them luck. I think they do have to take some care in exemptions. They do have to take a hard look at how it will impact rural Alaska, and whether the economies of scale are such that maybe we should exempt certain regions. But, those are details that aren't going to affect the bottom line so much. It's important to try to have some sense of fairness in it.
So let's turn the page here. Energy in Alaska. I think, I had Representative Rauscher on last week. He chairs the energy on the House side, and had Lieutenant Governor on soon after that, and I had the general manager of HEA. We're all talking about energy, and holy crap, what if they don't renew a contract here, like just on the Kenai Peninsula with their natural gas, or what if we with under Biden, we stop exploring and we got to have, other ways of getting energy. Well, Senator Murkowski and Sullivan championed this small nuclear power plant project. Do you think that this is going to be a game changer for Alaska long term? These small, football size nuclear plants compared to the huge ones that, maybe people have seen that are on the East Coast, could power a city. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's important to kind of put the rhetoric aside, because I do, I see very progressive people who are absolutely hammering Biden for approving Willow, for reapproving the LNG pipeline. At some point they have to have some acknowledgement of, transitions don't happen overnight, because if they do, we'll have famine, we'll have war. We can't do that. And they also have to understand and appreciate that, like, Willow is an efficient, low carbon oil project. So to the extent, the 200,000 barrels are going to be pumped, these barrels are going to be much more efficient than Russian oil, than tar sands out of Canada. So we're reducing, you can actually be reducing the carbon footprint, and more so for LNG. If LNG displaces some coal plants in China, so much the better. So that's sort of the preface. But I think any transition, we've got to make LNG and nuclear part of it. We have to. And some of these new kind of tiny micro reactors are incredibly intriguing. They're not what people think of 3 Mile Island and those sorts of things. They're very small, compact, sealed, very safe. And the disposal is, after whatever it is, 10 or 20 years, you pull the whole thing out of the ground and you ship it off. It's really fascinating, and I think could be, part of the answer.
So do you think that Alaska needs to be looking into renewables outside of that? I mean, renewables is kind of this, for a lot of conservatives, it's kind of like this, makes them kind of throw up in their mouth a little bit. But do you think there's a real, stopgap in 5 years where if we don't find a solution, we're going to have, rolling outages or something like that? Do you think it's that important, or do you think it's just,
Well, I think it's important to diversify. I mean, some renewables have promise, some are boondoggles. It's like with anything. Some are, very, very efficient. Some, if the energy costs 10 times as much, you're not going to get there. But I do think, solar, some other things are really moving in that direction. But, most renewables have the problem of the availability issue. Solar, while the sun's up, great, sun goes down. Wind is the same. It's a great add-on. It's a great diversification of the grid, but you can't rely on it solely, at least not here. But I think, the heartbreaking thing would be, at some point, we don't renew leases or something, and we're shipping LNG in, we turn Nikiski into an import terminal. I mean, that'll break my heart if we have more energy than anywhere on Earth and we're bringing it in. So I'm in favor of diversifying, but not just for the environmental impacts, which are important, but also for the fact of the more diverse our grid, the more secure we are as a matter of, national and state security.
So let's talk a little bit about Anchorage. What do you think, for folks that live in Anchorage? You're very well aware of the elections that just happened. For folks that don't live in Anchorage, I know it's nonpartisan, but I think it is, but the Democrats kind of cleaned house in Anchorage, essentially. What do you think that says about Anchorage, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to look at, what kind of Democrats, and then there's people like, Zach Johnson down on the South side. I'm not sure if he's a Democrat. I saw him get criticized by both sides.
Yeah.
I saw a bunch of progressives pile onto him because they're like, do you know he used to be a trooper? And I'm like, well, good. Thank you for being thank you for your service. So it's not so much, there was a center to maybe a little bit of a center left skew in these results. But the big takeaway I had was when you looked at the rhetoric around the candidates and so forth, I think the voters were saying, make Anchorage boring again. We've had enough. We had COVID, which was hard on both sides of the spectrum. Then we've gone into
make Anchorage boring again. That's funny.
Yeah. And we've got an administration that's tried to pull us, 180 degrees in the other direction of the prior. I think he took it as a mandate to go completely the other direction. And the public, has said, you know what we really care about? Plowing, potholes, schools. So I think it really is sort of this return to the mean. It's almost a pendulum swing hard to the middle in my mind.
Dave Donnelly, though, pulling out a victory. He's always good for a victory in Anchorage.
Well, I think he's seen as yeah, because a lot of people have to vote for him and Holloman, right? They both win and they win big. And I think he's been there, he's consistent, he's experienced, even if people don't agree with him on a lot of stuff. I think he tends not to be super inflammatory. So there's a tonal aspect to all this as well.
So what do you think happens in 3 years? Give us your prediction for who you think is going to run for governor in 3 years.
Oh, geez, if I knew that, I would.
You'd be a rich man, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some talk, of course, of just kind of the natural that Lieutenant Governor Dahlstrom will step up and run. I don't know if she has interest in that or not. But I do think there is something. I think there's a little bit of a changing of the guard. I think people might want to see some new people. I mean, and that I say that regardless of politics. Some people might want to see, because when you go even 40 and down, mid 40s and down, there's a lot more, I guess, cross-pollination of friend groups, that sort of thing. I think there is this sort of desire, not for nonpartisanship, but just a desire for people who approach things a bit less divisively. So we just might see some new blood. I'd love to see something. I'd love to see, a rural candidate, a candidate from Fairbanks, Alaska Native candidate. I'd love to see something that we haven't seen before.
So what are you given this year for the Alaska House and the Alaska Senate a grade? A to F, and what's your reasoning?
Well, I'll start with a dodge, but then I'll get into it, because I think the grade's incomplete at this point. I think you've seen some really cool stuff. I think the freshman caucus, some of the things they pushed through relatively efficiently. Kudos, for example, to the governor and the Senate. I mean, pushing through this 12 months or this prenatal care for Medicaid expansion, huge deal. I mean, people, oh, that's not that big a deal. I mean, these are lives, because we have the highest mortality rates for both babies and mothers. We have some of the highest, and this is going to be a leap forward. So, in spots, I see these great bright spots. I see the freshman caucus working together, and then you take a step back and you see, people want their schools to work. They want some big things moved. They want a fiscal plan. And quite honestly, the legislature's over here, going into our 1 million of testimony on HB 105 and that divisive stuff. And I really think it's taking the air out. I had a comment to me the other day, what happened to the governor's carbon bills? Those seemed interesting. People across the spectrum were interested. Well, he put his political capital behind this very divisive thing, and now there we are. So, I'll say B minus. We'll see after the end game. Let's come back in a few weeks and see if they actually got this thing buttoned up. But what's frustrating is it's like seeing an athlete that has all this potential but just keeps striking out. Like this legislature, the way it's composed, they could really do some great things, but the bright shiny objects distracting everyone are not helpful.
Yeah, I think that those two carbon bills are very fascinating from the governor's office. And man, even if they pan out just a little bit, the numbers that are coming out of the governor's office are huge. They're in the billions of dollars, but even if they panned out in the hundreds of millions of dollars, man, that's going to be a game changer long term for Alaska.
Yeah, and it's different. It's a creative, different idea, which I appreciate. But there's, as you probably know from following things, there's only so much oxygen in that building. So, you can't move 3 heavy rocks in one session. You got to pick. So I think it's a shame, but maybe they get, the fever breaks and they come back next year and to get a couple of these cool things over the line.
So last question is this, Scott. What do you think the chances of repealing ranked choice voting are, sitting from the perspective of the guy that helped champion it in, help it to get on the ballot, helped it to win, helping it to stay here? I'm somebody who's not a huge fan of ranked choice voting, but tell us your thoughts on, do you think it's got a chance to be repealed or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a phenomenon, and I think it's a real one, that ranked choice voting, RCV, has become kind of a partisan dirty word. But I've seen some of the numbers that when you talk about the whole system, you talk about the concept of this open primary and having every race be competitive, it appears to remain very, very popular. So I think if people pierce past the rhetoric of just, RCV is bad and think about the whole system, I think the chances for it being upheld are very, very strong because people understood it, seemed to like it. But the real, the game changer, of course, is the open primary. Mary Peltola didn't win because of ranked choice voting. She led at every stage of the election. She won in large part because she was a moderate Democrat who never would have won a closed Democratic primary. And, she was a palatable Democrat statewide, which isn't something the state had seen. And I think it's fair to say quite some time.
Do you think anybody has a shot beating her? I feel like once, somebody like her is in, it's going to be so hard to beat an incumbent like her who's, becoming a fundraising machine. Do you think anybody's got a chance to even try to knock her off the pedestal?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is it depends. I mean, always, I used to box and they always say matchups make fights. There was always, no matter how good a fighter was, there's always one fighter who's got their number. So a lot's going to depend on who runs against her. I mean, I think we've seen her versus, Sarah Palin and Nick Begich. I think if those two were in, or either one of those two, I think I've got no reason to think you get a different result.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, she's in there. She's part of the Democratic minority, and she has to answer for every vote. So, from what I've seen from her, very positive. I mean, I think keeping Congressman Young's chief of staff was smart, not only politically smart, but the way she's been able to hit the ground running and get things done. Having Josh Revak here in state, great guy. The guy is a constituent services machine. That's, that was one of Don Young's great strengths. His staff would get things done for hundreds of Alaskans. Those hundreds of Alaskans had thousands of friends, and it mattered. I knew plenty of Democrats who voted Don Young every time because 15 years ago, he helped them out with some tricky clean water issue or something. So
he was such a special guy, Don Young.
Yeah. So I think she's going to have to stick with it. I mean, incumbency has its advantages, but there's probably a candidate out there that could beat her, but they're going to have to, if they're going to beat her, they're going to have to meet her in the middle and debate those issues. You're not going to be over and throw, sort of partisan shots from the far right and be able to beat a candidate like this.
Yeah, Don Young is one of my favorite memories on Don Young. Everybody's got their Don Young stories. I was in DC, visited him in his office, and he's busy as all heck. And I'm sitting with him in his office, and he's telling me stories, and we're having a heck of a time. And one of his assistants comes in and says, Don, you got a meeting with so-and-so chairman of the so-and-so committee, blah, blah, blah. He goes, I got John Quick here. He's from Alaska. Hold all my appointments. We got somebody from Alaska here. Just that's who he was. He's just such a cool guy. He made you feel like $1 million, and he probably made everybody feel like that.
Yeah, I mean, he did, so many things for so many people, and not because they were a donor. I mean, for all his rhetoric, I think he got away with something. His rhetoric would be pretty sharp sometimes, but he was such a kind man, had empathy. I mean, he said things that offended me. I'll be perfectly honest. He said things from time to time. I'm like, Don, what are you doing? But then I saw what he did. Like I saw what he did for dental health in rural Alaska.
Yeah.
And my good friend Val Davidson tells his story about going into his office and saying, we're about to lose all this. We're going to lose dental care for, in all of rural Alaska. He has someone run down the hall. They come back. He sticks some language in some bill. Boom. What do you know? This dental health aid thing gets stuck
boom,
into
it's
some
fixed.
bill. And, and Val has told me she goes to rural Alaska and she sees hundreds of kids and they have beautiful smiles with all their teeth. And she says, that's Don Young to her. So it's a real, his impact will kind of continue on. Whether you loved him or you hated him, he got stuff done.
Yeah, he knew how to get stuff done. Well, Scott, I appreciate you joining us. We're 40 minutes in, or 35 minutes in, has gone by very fast. And hopefully you'll come back on. You're welcome back anytime. Any last minute thoughts before we head off here?
No, not at all. I really appreciate it. I'd love to come back, post end of session, and maybe we can do a post-mortem, but always appreciate the time, appreciate the tone of the conversation where, two people who maybe disagree on a couple things, but it's always a fun time. So I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. I always enjoy chatting with you, and we'll have you on again. And for folks out there, again, if you live on the Kenai Peninsula, check your email inbox, check your junk mail box too, because HEA sent a voter pamphlet to your inbox. It's got a couple of house cleaning kind of language fixes in there. It's got one board vote in there, and then it's got a "Do you like to vote online?" question in there. So make sure to check your inbox. And folks, I hope everybody has a phenomenal weekend. I want to thank our sponsor of the show, the University of Alaska. You can go check them out at empower.alaska.edu. I just really want to thank them for sponsoring the Must Read Alaska show. And we're going to have Pat Pitney, the president of the University of Alaska, on next week, which is very exciting. So until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, John.